Good evening to everyone attending this evening on Teams and on the Money Space live stream. Welcome to Sparta Live, an online program of lively workshops themed around the history, archaeology and legacy of Sparta and Laconia, hosted jointly by the Center for Spartan and Peloponnesian Studies of the University of Nottingham and the city of Sparti, the site of ancient Sparta in Greece. I'm Chrysanthi Galou, Associate Professor of Archaeology and the Director of the Center. And today I'm joined by the Mayor of Sparti, Mr. Petros Doukas, my colleagues, Dr. Alberto Esu and Dr. Philip Davies, both Assistant Professors in Ancient History here at Nottingham, who are in charge actually of today's webinar. So without further ado, I'll first pass over to Mayor Doukas to welcome you on behalf of the city of Sparti, and then to Alberto and Philip to lead today's session. Petros, over to you.
Thank you, Chrysanthi. You and your team at Nottingham and the whole university have been doing a tremendous job showcasing parts of the Spartan civilization and attracting such really top level professors and academics like Massimo. And we thank you very much, Massimo. We're grateful to you for your studies and the time you're spending for doing such original studies. Because, you know, we feel that Sparta and not Athens is the home of the Western political civilization. I mean, you know, the fact that the Vice President of the United States presides over the USA Senate is because the Americans, Madison and Hamilton, copied the Lycurgus Constitution where the two kings presided over the Spartan Senate. So the Americans said, okay, we'll have the Vice President of the USA to preside over the American Senate. Now, the fact that he's commander-in-chief is because the Spartan kings were commanders-in-chief, and the idea of a Senate and free public education. So we have so much to showcase, and Massimo, we're really grateful for your very, very original work, which is very surgical, very particular aspects of Spartan life and why they did. It's not only what they did and how they did it and why they did that, including this whipping ceremonies to probably show that they can suffer in favor of gods and what have you. So very excited to see you, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Petros. This very kind words, and I enjoy this invitation, and it is. I'm very excited to be here, and it is a great pleasure and a great honor, in fact. But I don't know how it should go on. I took the word.
Thank you very much to Petros Doukas and Massimo. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you all the guests today, all the audience that are so many at this webinar today. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, our distinguished speaker today, who is Massimo Nafissi, professor in Greek history at the University of Perugia in Italy. Massimo obtained his PhD from the University of Pisa, and his main research interests are the history of Sparta, the epigraphy of Iasos in Caria, Greek colonization, and particularly the Greek colonization in Magna Graecia. Massimo is particularly interested in ancient historiography, local traditions and religion, not just of Sparta, and in collective memory and construction of the past and communal identities. And at the moment he's working on different projects. One is on Spartan culture in late Hellenistic time, on Artemis Orteia, of which we will hear something today, and on the decoration of the throne of Apollos Adamic Lion, as well as the oracles and narratives in Greek colonization. So with no further ado, I introduce also the paper that Massimo will present to us today. It's going to talk about the agώνες of Orteia in Sparta, in particular the ritual of the cheese stealing and the diamastigosis. So please, thank you very much, Massimo, again.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I repeat myself, but it's a great honor and a great pleasure to be invited to give a talk in this beautiful webinar series. I would like to sincerely thank, as I already did, in fact, the mayor of Sparta, Dr. Petros Doukas, the director of this prestigious Center for Spartan and Peloponnesian Studies, Crisanti Gallo, and all the members of the staff, distinguished scholars that I will not mention one by one, but that are really the point of reference for everyone who is studying Sparta and Peloponnesian history too. Thank you, Alberto, for your kind words of introduction, and thank to all the listeners from all over the world for being here. I see or assume to be there some friends dear to me, whom I greet any anonymously. I'm also forced to apologize to everyone for the very poor quality of my English. I hope I am at least comprehensible, but I am certain that I'm about to put your Spartan virtue of carteria to test. My presentation today is not about all the competition for Orthea, despite its rather ambitious title and abstract. And as Alberto was saying, my focus is on two agons that we might call the whip agons. I'm the diamastigosis or mastigosis, the whipping to the bitter end, as we could say, it is an agon which late Hellenistic and imperial sources speak so much about. The diamastigosis is, however, heir to an earlier agon, which we know about basically thanks to Xenophon. For that event, the boys had to steal cheese intended for the goddess, and in their attempt, they were soundly whipped. As we know, both ancient and modern observers usually regarded Sparta as a constant, unchanging community. The story of a whip agons, however, is one of the most obvious cases of a change occurring in its customs. I will speak about the duke contest, starting with a more ancient one, also to provide you with some new details on diamastigosis that have emerged from my research on it. In the last part of my talk, I would like to discuss with you how the cheese stealing contest developed into the diamastigosis. Many hypotheses have been offered about when this change occurred, but discussing how seems to me also useful. Xenophon describes the ancient agon while speaking of the theft of food as part of the education of young Spartans. It's the next slide. Like Kurgos, I quote, having proposed as a point of honor for the young men the stealing of as many cheeses as possible from Orthea, ordered others to strike them with a whip. His intention was to show that one can enjoy lasting fame by enduring short-lived suffering, which also shows that in cases where speed of execution is required, the indolent have the least advantage and the most discomfort. By the way, today I'm not going to go into the thorny textual issue of whether the young Spartan actually stole wheat rather than cheese. So I will speak about cheese. So the young men tried to steal as many cheeses from the goddess as possible, while others tried to prevent them from doing so with their whips. Xenophon makes it clear that the contest brought honor and fame to the winners. By Plato at the beginning of the laws. Among the practices of pain endurance devised by Lycurgus to train the Spartans in warrior virtue. Plato simply recalled some thefts practiced each time among many beatings. We therefore know very little about its competition. On the whole, it must have been a violent game, but the Spartans were accustomed to the brutalities of their upbringing. And it is easy to imagine that they found it entertaining. Attack and withdrawal must have alternated swiftly in the contest. The astuteness and speed of the boys would have aroused a sympathetic admiration of the onlookers, but they also had to burst out laughing every time the whip struck, and it happened very often indeed. All the agons of Orthia were closely connected with specific Spartan educational practices, but this was particularly true for the cheese-stealing agon. The competition was clearly inspired by the stealing that the boys were encouraged to practice to supplement their meals. These were deliberately meager in order to accustom them to hunger. In fact, we read of thieving Spartan youths in Xenophon, Socrates, the Aristotle of the Constitution of the Lacedaemonians, and Plutarch. Stealing food was permitted, indeed encouraged, but boys were not to be caught in the act of stealing. In the agon, the boys were called upon to prove their stealing skills. The food was, however, an offering to the goddess and was therefore well protected from men armed with whips. Consequently, in order to win, the boys had to prove that they could steal and also endure pain, another major goal of the Spartan paideia. In 1929, in the final publication of Ορθία excavations, Herbert Ross defined cheese stealing a rough game. Later on, in 1941, in a paper entitled Greek Rites of Stealing, Ross felt he had to go back on this original idea, redefining the event as a rite or a ritual. Even in our days, the cheese stealing event is very often referred to as a ritual. In seeking religious comparanda for the Spartan event described by Xenophon, a reference has been made to bomolokia, understood as ambushing and stealing food at the altar. In the light of work by Françoise Frontisidou-Creux, the bomolokos is interpreted as a buffoonish beggar lurking at the altar, ready to grab food. For this reason, some relationship between the famous mask of Orthia and the rituals of the theft has also been argued. In fact, this argument doesn't hold. Some years ago, Stephen Kidd has shown that in classical times, the term bomolokos, when referring to a person, meant simply jester or fool. Bomolokos is in fact a bird, originally a bird. Attic vases depict birds perched on altars. The name of the bird was used to designate a person prone to empty chattering and silly witticisms. The cheese agon has nothing to do with a human bomolokia. Most scholars stress the religious character of the Spartan agón by comparing it with the Samian ritual for Artemis mentioned by Herodotus. Herodotus recounts the ition of the ritual. The tyrant of Corinth, Periander, had sent 300 young boys from Corcyra to the king of Lydia, Alyattes, to have them emasculated. On reaching Samos, the Samians learned of the boys' sad fate, and they arranged for the young Corcyrians to take refuge as supplicants in the sanctuary of Artemis. However, the Corinthians who were conveying the boys to Lydia tried to seize them from the sacred place and prevented any food from being brought to them. At night, the Samians sent out dancing groups of boys and girls to take sesame sweets and honey to the goddess. The Corcyrian boys took the food by force, arpazontes, and were thus able to feed themselves. The festival, says Herodotus, carries on in the same way at this day. This comparison has led some to consider the competitive nature of the Spartan event as secondary, and to postulate ritualistic origins for the practice known to us. Chanduka, for example, suggests that the Spartans added a competitive element to an older ritual, perhaps in the 7th century. This genetic and ritualistic perspective does not seem convincing to me. In no way does cheese stealing derive from the religious rituals of taking offerings intended for the deity, and it has no kinship with them. The comparative perspective is valuable, but should not lead us to divorce the Spartan agón from the forms and intentions of the educative practice that determined its extraordinary specificity. The singularity of the cheese-stealing agón actually reflects a no less striking feature of the Spartan paideia, theft. The comparison with Herodotus' account of the Corcyrian boys on Samos is instructive, however, for another reason. Ritual or agonistic behavior involving the theft of food destined for a god was seen as alarming. In Herodotus' Aetion, the theft is justified by the moral obligation to rescue the young men. They are seriously threatened by the cruelty of a tyrant who has condemned them to a barbaric and degrading punishment. In the case of Sparta, the Aetion of the agón, as recounted by Plutarch, traces, the next slide please, Matt, traces the theft of the offerings back to the barbarians' hostility toward the Greeks and disrespect for gods and nomos. Plutarch writes, "It is said by some that while Pausanias, just in front of the ranks of the men lined up for battle, was intent on sacrificing and invoking the gods, some Lydians threw themselves into the attack and suddenly came to steal, arpazin, and topple the offerings and sacrificial furnishings to the ground. Pausanias and those around him, having no weapons, allegedly struck them with sticks and whips." Here, the theft is attributed to barbarians, the Lydians, while the defense of the altar recalls one of the glorious moments in Spartan history, the Battle of Plataea. To sum up, we have here a rather extraordinary agón, and the actions of the young men, although certainly authorized, could almost seem to be sacrilegious. so much so that their origins are associated with the actions of barbarians. We now move on to the late Hellenistic imperial whipping contest, the diamastigoses. The contest was also called mastigas, the whips, or tas carterias agon, contest of the strength to endure. The winners were called bomonikai, the winners of the altar contest. The oldest mention of these that can be dated with confidence is found in Cicero, who probably witnessed the diamastigoses in 79 before Christ. Plutarch, Lucian, and Philostratus probably also witnessed the show themselves, and they all speak of Greeks flocking to the contest. As far as we know, Libanius is the last ancient author to have witnessed the Agon between 336 and 340 AD. Before considering the course of the Agon, it is useful to recall its Aition, which is found in Pausanias and other ancient authors. The myth is based on Euripides' Iphigenia in Tauris. Euripides links the cult of the Artemis Tauropolos of Halai Araphenidis in Attica, where human blood is shed, to the bloodthirsty Taurian goddess. As we know from Pausanias and other sources, many communities claimed that the statue of the Taurian goddess was in their possession. These were often cults with violent traits. A case in point is Diana Aricina with its famous tradition of the Rex Nemorensis. Let us follow Pausanias' account. Is the next slide. I resume the text. The statue of Taurian Artemis had been brought to the city by Orestes, who had fled with Iphigenia from Tauris. Much later, two brothers, Alopicus and Astrabacus, find it on the banks of the Eurotas, upright and bound by a willow. Unbound, the goddess unleashes her power and drives the two young men mad. Later, during a sacrifice, fratricidal fights break out between the members of the different groupings of the civic body, and the survivors fall ill. An oracle then orders the altar to be bathed in human blood. Human sacrifices are initiated, which Lycurgus eventually replaced with a more civilized diamastigoses. While the earliest reference to the story is in Pausanias' Periegrisis, we do not know when the story that Pausanias tells originated, and it would be rash to assume that it dates back to the time when the Agon was reformed. Anyway, how the Agon worked? The main attempts to reconstruct the Agon were conducted by Jean Ducas and Nigel Kennel. We can only speculate on important features such as its place in the festive calendar or the precise age of the participants. Ducas and Kennel reasonably consider, however, that it was a final moment in the idea of the youths on the threshold of their entrance into adulthood. The ancient descriptions of the Agon present us with two sets of divergences. The former is difficult to give a satisfactory explanation for, and we will not deal with it today. One source, Nicholas of Damascus, speaks of multiple victors, while others speak of or imply only one victor. Let us deal with the second, which concerns the concrete development of the action and, to some extent, the spectacular quality of the event. The main body of sources refers to the blows inflicted on the young men on the altar or by the altar, and mention is made of the blood they shed, sometimes noting explicitly how it bathed the altar. Furthermore, the importance of the altar is underlined by the title of Vomonikae for the victors, which is attested from the middle of the 2nd century AD. Pausanias, who gives the next slide should be, perhaps the most refined and the most famous description of the competition, recalls that the altar was covered with blood of the boys, as the priestess held the statue of the goddess. If the blows became less severe, out of respect, I quote, for the beauty or the rank of the young men, end of the quotation, the priestess would declare that the statue should become heavier and reprimand the floggers. Nicholas of Damascus, on the other hand, makes no mention of the blood and describes the boys, the next slide, who, as the law requires, are flogged while circling an altar until the few who still resist are crowned. Nicholas of Damascus's description led Dukas to state that there were two successive forms of diamastigosis. Beware, there will be not only the two agons, the older chief theft and the more recent diamastigosis, but according to Dukas, the diamastigosis itself would have known two different forms over time. In the earlier period, boys would have been whipped as they circled the altar with the arms raised, while during the course of the imperial age, around 150 AD, the custom would have been established of whipping boys on the altar to bathe it in blood. Perhaps it's not necessary to distinguish between these two ways of being flogged. Indeed, in order to cover an altar in blood, the flogged do not have to be actually leaning against the altar itself, nor does the body need to drip blood directly onto it by bending over it, for instance. Admittedly, the Scholia on Horace described one young man being flogged while his hands rest on the altar. However, I consider this to be a dramatic antiquarian mythographic fantasy rather than a reliable evidence. All that was needed to bathe the altar in blood was to place or rub blooded whips on it. Vases from the classical period depict altars with intentionally bloody sides, apparently applied by various instruments, including branches and sticks. The sources that identify the Orthia with Artemis Taurica clearly put particular emphasis on the blood that bathes the altar, although Cicero already makes mention of the altar and focuses on the blood that the boys shed. The next slide, there is a Latin verse quoted by Cicero, multus et visceribus sanguis exeat. Dukas considers the possibility that the tradition regarding the Tauric origin of the goddess was decisive in how the description of the event came to emphasize the blood bathed in the altar. But he does not choose this line of interpretation. He prefers to suppose this change in the development of the agón. In fact, this belief, the belief on the historic origin of the goddess, may have led the Spartans into making the blood of the young men bathe the altar, but it also led to a different way of seeing and describing the agón, the attention now focused on the blood on the altar. I would therefore suggest that the two ideas of the boys circling the altar and of them being beaten on the altar are not incompatible. Cicero speaks of the blows received by young men when they approach the altar. They are received at the altar. These words seem to refer to the initial procession, but they could allude to the blows that the young men suffered every time they approached the altar. Therefore, I will not assume that there were two successive types of diamastigosi, at least not under this aspect. On the contrary, we can imagine that the youths walked slowly in a wide circle around the altar, and they were flogged as they were standing and held up their arms with their hands on their heads, as Lucian, for instance, describes, when they were closest to the altar. Here, some of their blood would have splashed onto the bomos or dripped onto the platform of the altar. More blood might have been spilled intentionally on the altar simply by placing or rubbing the whips on it. The solemn pace of the youths in the area between the front of the temple and the altar, and then when the theater of Artemis Orthia had been built, along the circumference of the orchestra of the theater, gives a dramatic edge to the cruel agón. The altar of Orthia is relatively small, 8.20 by 2.60 meters in Roman times, and can thus imagine that the boys were divided into groups. The groups, however, had to compete at the same time. Otherwise, how could the winner, the boy who held out the longest, be identified? The arena of the amphitheater, with its diameter of approximately 20 meters, had to accommodate all the young citizens, groups of whom were whipped as they reached the altar. Actually, the dimension of the theater has been planned to have all the people going around the orchestra. The riotous dash to steal the cheese was thus replaced by the calm and disciplined bearing of the young men determined to endure the pain. The agón was thus primarily a compendium and display of Spartan virtue. The young men submitted to the blows of the whip in silence and in an act of endurance expressed in the very names given to the contest. The term carteria recalls the strength of their resistance, and the preposition dia as prefix to mastigosis emphasizes the intensity and relentlessness of the action and their ability to overcome it. But how far did these challenges go? Cicero claims to have heard of Spartan boys who died under the blows of the lash, while Lucian refers to this as a fact, and Plutarch seem to assume widespread contemporary knowledge of such deaths. The sources should certainly be treated with some caution, but on the whole, they seem to be largely reliable. This is further supported by Lucian, who mentions statues of young men who died in the Diamastigoses, and specifies, it's the next slide, I think, that these were erected by the city. Honorary statues in imperial Sparta that were decreed by the city were mostly erected at the expense of private individuals. Lucian would, however, have considered these energetic acts for what they were, that is, gestures that showed the devotion of private individuals to the community, that in no way diminished the public dimension of the honor bestowed. It has not been noted before, but the base of one of these statues has probably come down to us. It is Artemis Ορθία 356, number 142, found in the substructure of the theater of Orthia, which most likely postdates the Constitutio Antoniniana 212 AD. The text reads, the city, this next slide with the Greek text too, the city in the strange dialect of 2nd, 3rd century Sparta. The city honors Marcus Aurelius Euarestos, son of Zoilos, companion in the education of Marcus Aurelius Aristocrates, son of Damaenetos, and of Tiberius Claudius Iranion, son of Hyginos, for having admirably resisted the buagoi upon the expense. The statue certainly honored a participant in the Diamastigoses, the agon, tas karterias, kartereanta in the Greek text. Most interpreters believe that Marcus Aurelius Euarestos was a Bomonikas, but this does not seem to be the case. Why keep silent about this high-sounding title, which had long been in use at the time the statue of Aurelius Euarestos was erected? Kenner, on the other hand, has another more likely suggestion. He suggests that the young man was not a winner, but had completed the contest still on his feet. In support of this interpretation, we might be tempted to recall what Nicholas of Damascus had to say about the recognition reserved for the few who distinguished themselves in such a trial. But this interpretation is, in the end, implausible. A race, an agon, conducted to the point that only one contestant remains standing is very different to one that allows more than one runner to remain upright. It is also very unlikely, and this is, in my opinion, the decisive point, that the city would reserve the same great honor, both for the winner and for those, albeit a few, who simply endure. It is more likely that the young man did not win, but allowed himself to be whipped to death, and that the text Epiphanor Tartereanta, for having excelled in enduring, refers to death adopting a restrained but highly charged euphemism. A statue in his honor would thus be entirely appropriate. The Diamastigoses exposes a young man to the supreme alternative of winning or dying. Each participant had to face with the full weight of the mirage and glory of Sparta, social pressures, and the fear of all his own fears, including fear of his physical pain. And I come to the last point. The case of the two whip contest is the clearest example of the transformation of Spartan education institution between the classical and Roman eras, a transformation that Nigel Kennell has taught us to examine with great care. Kennell himself ascribed the shift from the chief stealing agon to the Diamastigosis to the agogé reforms implemented by Cleomenes III on the advice of the Stoic Pharos of Borysthenes. Yucca dates this change to revival of Spartan institutions in the 2nd century BC after the Achaean parenthesis. There are other less likely proposals, but my question today, however, is not when, but how. The case of the Diamastigosis is useful as the comparison of the order whip agon allows us to assess precisely how this agon was reformed. It seems clear to me that when the reform was carried out, the Spartans certainly had the cheese stealing agon in mind. The similarities between the two agons, the whips, the centrality of the altar suggest this. In general terms, the reform must have been proposed by influential individuals in accordance with shared values. The approval of the reform by Spartan political bodies brought into play demands for individual and collective self-representation. Decrees approving religious reforms or reform of agώνες were usually motivated by the city wanting to honor the gods in a more appropriate and splendid manner, while acting in a way that was worthy of the city itself. In terms of the relations with the divine, the meaning of the intervention is relatively clear. The Spartans abolished acts that risked appearing sacrilegious. The text of resistance to pain became more demanding, but it also took on very explicit religious connotations. These are clear, especially after the creation of the myth that relate the agon to Artemis Storica, which gave to the agon a para-sacrificial aspect, because the agon and the blood of the young man would have replaced the human sacrifices that had once been carried out to ensure the benevolence of Artemis and the welfare of the city. And therefore also the blood of the young man was thought to ensure this benevolence of the goddess. But the proposal to turn the theft of cheeses into the agondas carterias must therefore have been made by invoking the demands of religious piety. This is not surprising, given that particular attention was paid to maintain an appropriate relationship with the divine in Spartan culture. Another obvious aspect is the icasticity with which the Diamastigosis encapsulates the essential values of Spartan discipline: high pain tolerance, the ability to face death with courage, and generally acting with dignity. The raucous dashing around of the cheese thieves who, like barbarians, rushed at the altar for scraps of food and were whipped like slaves or thugs, had been replaced by the calm, disciplined and determined bearing of young men who stepped forward and endured the beatings in silence. The Agón took an ethically irreproachable character, more decorous and in keeping with the traditional semnotes of the city. Undoubtedly, the myth and prestige of Sparta exerted a great attraction on the outside world. However, paying homage to tradition was not only the result of choices made by the elite seeking prestige in the outside world for themselves and for the community, nor was it the result of adherence to classicistic models of Rome. The city elite had a deeply felt need to live up to its own tradition and past greatness. Sparta's homage to its own myth was first and foremost an endogenous product, even if the myth was further and fueled by interaction with the political and cultural elite of the Greek or Roman world. Their mastigosis arouses an instinctive revulsion in the modern mind. The bloodshed and seemingly gratuitous deaths scandalize us, and the amphitheater of Ορθία completes the picture. When the Agón is mentioned in passing, it is presented as a brutal ritual soliciting dubious tourism with a bloodthirsty, if not sadistic edge. Indeed, many scholars suggest that the spectators have the cliched Roman interest in spectacles, particularly bloody ones, such as the Munera Gladiatoria and Venationes. However, this reasoning seems to me to be misleading. The very appearance of the building where this spectacle took place, with its altar on the facade of the temple incorporated in the structure, accentuated any differences with the secular structure destined or converted for the celebration of Venationes and Munera. There are also many aspects that must qualify our ideas of the mastigosis, distancing it from any gladiatorial-like spectacle. The strong links of the Spartan Agón with the culture of the city and the traditional values of Greek civilization, the theme of respect for the gods, the reference to the virtues of Sparta and overcoming the fear of death, the evocation of the Lycurgan origins of the Agón, the nobility of the participants, and the absence of cash prizes, and last but not least, the reference to philosophical values such as carteria as a stoic virtue and an essential component of courage, or simply to Plato's thoughts on the resistance to pain, the carteresis, ton algedonon. Above all, perhaps there were the boys' fellow citizens among the public. Civic subdivisions and personal relationships must have determined participation, disappointments, and exultation. At the apex of the scale of relationship were obviously the youth's families. Long-held beliefs regarding Spartan behavior would have had an effect on all spectators, Spartans and non-Spartans alike. For example, it is likely that the mothers present wanted to be seen as faithful representatives of traditional Spartan motherhood. Indeed, the parents' reactions must have been a spectacle within a spectacle. The standard word that Lucian attributes to Solon and Anacharsis, the last slide, seemed to confirm this idea. Solon describes the interaction between youth and parents along the lines mentioned above, and praised the youth's virtues of resistance in their defense of the fatherland. To conclude, I could also shift now from the now to the when. The Spartans wanted to subject their male offspring to the pain and dangers of diamastigosis. Such an extreme choice is difficult to comprehend, unless it was undertaken for genuine religious concerns and, perhaps, above all, through an incredibly determined desire to assert the excellence of traditional Spartan education. If one reconsiders the issue of the chronology of the reform of the agώνες in its light, it might very well be linked to Cleomenes III and his restoration of Lecargan norms. However, it seems that the chauvinistic climate that must have reigned in Sparta when its sovereignty was restored after 146 and the liberation from Achaean government provides the most suitable context for the emergence of that unique tradition, the diamastigosis. Thank you so much for your attention.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Professor. Excellent.
Thank you very much, Professor Nafissi.
Thank you, Philip.
If people haven't yet or seen the message from Chrysanthi, you're welcome to put your questions or type them into the chat, and then we will get through as many of them as we can. Before that, we'll have a couple of people will, myself included, will take advantage of the fact we're hosting in order to ask a question. So if I understand you correctly, Professor Nafissi, in terms of that transition from the sort of more cheese theft-focused contest to the diamastigosis or katerias contest, that you see it as being motivated by an internal audience, motivated by Spartan internal considerations. In terms of its continuance, how significant as a consideration in Sparta do you think the external audience is, the Romans and other Greeks that we see, the non-Spartans we see commenting on this? Is it just that this happens to be where we get perspectives on this from?
Yes, I do not deny the importance of this guest from Emilius Paulus onward, and Caesar and all the people who came to visit Sparta. Anyway, we should not be, let's say, we should not deny the importance of the internal perspective. After all, on this theater sat mostly Spartans. And of course, no Spartans were more important, but in front of the altar were lined the authorities of Sparta. We have the seat of Augustan age, and also in the 3rd century there was this spectacular theorem and to be seen also. Sparta is giving to the other an image of herself, and this an image that is very structured in his tradition. I mean, it is so interesting when one. But so I do not deny the importance of the people who is coming from outside, but my point is that the climate after 146, it is the idea also of Dukas, must have been a very, very special time, and with an enduring consequence. Hostility to Achaeans was very, very strong, And the Spartan, yeah, I don't think that Flamininus wiped off everything in Sparta. It is impossible. But anyway, Spartans had this in mind, that Flamininus Philopaemen had deprived Sparta of its institution. So therefore, it was a time when everything happened to the Spartan institution. They have changed for many reasons over the century, became to be seen with just one deity, Philopaemen, the Achaeans. And to recreate that, it was a part of a national consciousness movement. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
So the Jew, there is some fuel from outside, but the fire is in Sparta.
Alberto, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, very much so. Thank you very much, Professor Nafissi, for this incredibly interesting and good paper. As a building on what has just been said by you, as answering to Phil, I was just very interested also because of my interest both in Sparta and on Greek honor. Since honor is so important, the concept of Greek tιμήν in this text that you have shown us, if you could say, if you see that part of this fuel, as you call it, of continuity that starts from within Sparta, despite all the change of the historical environment of the institution, if the Sparta system of value that constituted the Spartan understanding of the Greek tιμήν was what we could see basically underpinning this national rediscovery of Spartan tradition. If you see the value of tιμήν, the mechanism of tιμήν, the values that are attached to it, so the endurance of physical strength, etc., that you've shown as something, and for example, piety, the religious aspect as something that is particularly in continuity with the Spartan tradition in these.
Yes,
phenomena.
I think tιμήν is very important. After all, also the relationship with the God, with the deity, is tιμήν, and there is a civic timήν, and there is a personal timήν, and although Sparta obviously developed in the Roman times according the social new direction, let's say, in a more as a society of orders. One can see through the inscriptions of Stili, for example, and also by Aristos' inscription probably, that there were people which were not so prominent in the city socially, that through the education reached some qualification. There is a winner of Bomonicas who seems not to be one of the most important citizens, very high placed, but he had many honors, civic honors, and I think that the fact that he had been Bomonicas had some weight in that. But yes, I think that tιμήν is a key factor in all these activities, let's say, what the family does, what the young boys does. It is all around winning, and winning is to be crowned, and to be crowned is to be honored.
Yes, it's also interesting that even in these highly agonistic, if I can use the activity, there is anyway a communitarian aspect of Tιμήν, in the sense that then, as you have shown very well, there is anyway that public honor that these individual Timήν then feeds into the communal one that of the entire city. So it's not just the individual, it's not just this zero-sum game of honor that someone wins and takes over the other. Yeah.
If I can follow your what you are saying, it is in part something that happened always in Greece. I mean, it is a strange case of Panhellenic.
Yes.
Not Panhellenic game, but they are not going to a Panhellenic sanctuary to compete, but here they are competing in the city, and people is coming there to see them, and they are Spartans, and they win, and not just win, they compete to honor the city too, in front of the foreigners that come into Sparta. So yes, the civic aspect is, but this is Sparta after all. This is a strange city, not so strange. Because, I mean, not just because I'm Nottingham. I will say that it's not so strange, but it's not so strange. But the idea of Sparta and of her prestige is so important for them, and the civic prestige.
Professor,
yes.
A quick question. First of all, I noted that the young Spartans that were whipped, that were honored, had really adopted Roman names: Marcus Aurelius, Tiberius, Claudius, and everything. So it seemed that the Roman influence at the time, in terms of naming your kids, was very, very strong. And the other question is that it seems, from what you're saying, we have 3 rites of passage for young Spartans who want to keep their place in society or rise. The one is the capacity to be fast and nimble on your feet and steal without getting noticed. You don't move like a cow to steal. You have to be very, very fast on your feet. And that, I assume, was an exercise. Show me you can steal fast without me noticing you. Because if you're very slow like a cow, I will notice you and I will whip you. The second is the capacity to endure pain and heavy pain. And the third would be something a bit different from the Orthia, the capacity to go out and murder a hilot as part of the Kryptia organization. So these things would be tests for young Spartans who wanted to be high on the political and social ladder and admired in Sparta. Be fast and able to steal without being caught and punished, to endure punishment, and the humbling because if somebody whips you, you get humbled. And this is something that appears that the Spartans wanted you. They want you to be proud, but also to have a sense of humbleness. And the third is the Kryptia. Show me that you can go out at night alone and murder a rising hilot that seems to be of some sort of threat to that. Is that an assessment that you agree with?
There were many assessments. First of all, about the Roman names, they are Roman citizens. In this case, it is after Constitution Antoniniana, so everyone in the empire had became a Spartan, a Roman citizen. They had the trianomina. It was a Marcus Aurelius. If he was not before a Roman citizen. So the people that in Sparta had Roman names were also Roman citizens. And this was a very important status question, and it was beginning in the late Republic, probably. And second point, to be fast and yes, it is very important to endure pain. These are 2 great
virtues.
The virtues of this Spartan arete, which is a physical arete. It is not just physical. It is a part of this arete, because also enduring pain is not just physical, and but it has to do with this practice, agonistic physical practice that the Spartans that led the Spartans to be, for some centuries, to be very proficient in sporting activities. So I think that in the cheese stealing contest, it was more a question to be, let's say, astuto. Alberto, help me. Astuto.
Fast, astute, fast on your feet.
Smart.
To be smart. Because there were many people who were running to the trapeze or to the altar to take a cheese. And there were people who were defending. So your first help was the guy in front of you who would be get by the whip while you were running on his shoulder. About Crypteia, we don't know if Crypteia has been always what we read in Plutarch, Lycurgus, because in Plato we had another description of Crypteia. And I presume that Crypteia became what Aristotle say after the rebirth of Messenia, or birth of Messenia. But if I should say why the young Spartans had to be so strong and so fast and so able to make tests, it is why the Spartans imagined the education as a part of surviving school when they are abroad with a strategia against the enemy. Stealing is like finding food in enemy territory, and this has to do with that, and sleeping on couches and feeling cold. This is what happens to the people who are in the strategia that are going to fight against an enemy. I don't think Crypteia was so important for the Spartans, but for some decades in the 4th century. Before, it was another thing. It was a part of another surviving proof, but it was a part of education and selection of the best boys or the best young men to be selected as he pays. But I'm going to.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Nigel. Hi.
We have a substantive comment in the chat from Nigel Kennel. Nigel, would you care to put your points directly to Professor Nafissi, or I think he's having some connection issues, which may be why he wrote like that, because I think I've had to admit him multiple times. So that could be, so I'll ask him once again, but we'll see. It might not be that he's not be able to get through. Nigel Kennel, can you hear me, or are you currently having connection issues? Yes, but this is obviously the downside when we have so many, so many people tuning in from so many different locations. So,
Phil, excuse
yeah.
me, I have made Nigel a presenter, so if he unmutes his microphone, he should be able to contribute. I think if you can just read the comments and then anytime.
Yeah, I'll just read.
Maybe.
So Nigel's left a substantive comment in the chat, which raises different points, mostly, of course, being very complimentary to Professor Nafissi's talk. So he says about whether we can have parallels for the Epiphanos Cattedra Are you aware of any parallels we could draw for this?
Yes,
yes.
I gave a look to the parallels, and I must say that sometimes I found it for people who were deaf. So it is a part of my of the work that I have to do, but it is possible, I would say. There are cases in a military context. So epiphanos, this is a very common word, but in honorary inscription is not so common, and it looks like a very high charged word. And in some cases, it is used for people who are dead, and therefore I presume that it could be a possibility. And about the amphitheater, probably it is a problem I was also posing to myself. If it is a statue for someone who is so honored because he has died, why was his statue placed out of use, in a sense, not so many years after his victory, because the base was found incorporated in the amphitheater of the sanctuary. I imagine that the statue was erected in the sanctuary, and there is another particular fact. It is the only inscription for a victor or a participant to the amastigosis which is written in the Laconian dialect. So this is interesting. It's a vernacular, national aspect of the virtue, which is unstressed. And the other aspect could be that in making place, social consideration have been used. So he was a second category Spartan. The Boagoi were the most important Spartans at the time, and this could perhaps explain why when taking away some statue, he'd fall victim, let's say, of this need for space. As to the last point, Plutarch's Ition for the contest that links in the Battle of Plataea is his way of accounting for the amastigosis, not the early stealing contest. Yeah, yes, you are right. You know everything about that, and but I presume, as many scholars presume, that the earlier Aetion was reused for the new Agon by Plutarch, but the action, what is happening, has to do the stealing contest. They are coming to the altar. They are arpazein, says the text. Therefore, I suppose that it was an older Aetion, I suppose an Hellenistic Aetion. It looks like something not so ancient. And it is an older Aetion, which was reused by Plutarch in connection with his experience of the whipping contest, because the whips were the point. And he knew that one.
Just to read it out, I'm getting another comment through from Nigel. I thought that the amphitheatre was constructed at the Herulian Sack, and that then the games at Artemis Orthia were reduced to the Diamastigosis alone, but there is no way to prove that at present. So we could be looking at
yes, it's possible. It is possible, but yes, I know. But this is more a commentary than a question, or?
Did anyone else want? Were there any other questions that anyone wanted to put to Professor Nafissi? If not, we are coming close to our closing time either way, so it's not a not a terrible dilemma. No.
Thank you, Nigel, for your question.
Yes, thank you very much for your input, Nigel. It's very helpful.
Professor, excellent. Very interesting new insights.
Thank you.
As to what and why and how. Very good.
Good. Well, if that is, we're finished there. I shall make my own thank yous to Professor Nafissi for a very interesting paper. I'll pass to Chrysanthi to close our proceedings for today.
Thank you very much, Professor Nafissi. Really, thank you.
Thank you to both of you and to everyone who was hearing my paper.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Massimo, for this very informative talk. I promised to you yesterday, when we had our informal meeting, that I will be sharing with you the drawings for our educational program. And I think since we have people here, I will make an attempt of sharing with you what the center is using, the drawings that artist Matt Brooker is doing. He's also known as the Israeli. So I'll try to share, because you can see like how children in at Nottingham schools perceive the can people see that?
Yes.
Yeah, so these are the ones that we have produced for our primary school programs.
I'm still not seeing it.
So they're not as informative as your paper, which was really exciting, but we are trying our best to teach children here at Nottingham of how they should be doing, like how they should be perceiving. So I hope this is informative. I'll stop sharing here. And of course, I would like to thank you once again for this excellent talk. And it has been a pleasure to have you. And it's a pleasure to also put a face in all these brilliant studies that we've been reading. And your work is widely appreciated. So thank you very much. And thank you also to Nigel Kennell, another good friend of the center, for his excellent comments. I should also like to thank, on behalf of the center, Mayor Doukas and the City Council of Sparta for their ongoing support, the University of Nottingham and the marketing team of the School of Humanities for their continued support, My colleagues, Alberto Esu, Phil Davis, and Matt Thompson, for being in charge of the session today and leading it in an exemplary way. And to Mr. Petros Kapernarakos, Vachos Radio, and MoneySpace for media sponsorship. There are so many people watching us through the website at the moment. Above all, of course, I would like to thank all of you who have attended today's talk, and we very much hope that you will be joining us again next week. That is Thursday, the 26th of January, 5 p.m. UK time, 7 p.m. Greek time. We will be hosting our own Dr. Matt Thompson, Associate Lecturer in Ancient History, who will be talking to us about Spartiates and Lacedaemonians, the language of identity in archaic and classical Sparta. And before we close the session, shall I remind everyone that if you're not yet a member of our center and you wish to become one, it's free, and you can see that you can listen to exciting papers. Do email us at csps@nottingham.ac.uk. Have a very nice evening, and see you all next week. Thank you, Massimo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Many,
you.
many
Bye.
thanks. We're
Thank you
grateful.
so much. Thank
Bye.
you so
Thank
much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.